He looked me dead in the eyes and said it. You weren't invited. Not loudly, not with anger. Calmly, the way someone speaks a fact, so obvious it barely needs saying. His gold-embossed VIP invitation was already in his hand, the same one he'd been showing strangers on the plane from Houston to Washington. All around us. Uniformed officers, government officials, the families of people being honored, soft ceremonial music drifting in from the hall beyond. And my father, the man who raised me, who watched me grow up, and somehow never quite saw me, smiled that small, familiar smile I had known since I was 6 years old. The one that said, I know something you don't. 10 seconds later, a 2-star United States Air Force general crossed the room. Not toward my father, toward me. I felt the lobby shift. The air tightened. The woman at the registration desk had scanned my invitation, looked at her screen, looked at me, looked at her screen again, and then turned and found the general across the room and said, with an urgency she couldn't quite hide, Sir, she's here. My father went completely still. My name is Diana Reeves. I'm 40 years old, and I spent most of my life invisible inside my own family. But before I tell you what happened in that lobby, before I tell you what my father's face looked like when a 2-star general walked past him to shake my hand, I need to take you back to a kitchen in Beaumont, Texas, and a 6-year-old girl holding a drawing of a horse, waiting for someone to look at her. Because every enormous moment starts somewhere tiny that nobody bothers to remember. And this story started there. My father, Raymond Reeves, worked at a paper mill outside Beaumont for 30 years. He wasn't a cruel man. He never drank, never left, never raised his hand. He shoveled neighbors' driveways without being asked. He paid the bills on time. He drove us to church every Sunday. From the outside, from a neighbor's porch, from the next pew over, Raymond Reeves looked like a solid, dependable father. And I want you to hold on to that, because it matters. The most painful kind of neglect isn't the kind that looks like neglect. It's the kind that looks like love. Love that was just never quite pointed at you. When my younger brother Jason was born, everything shifted. There was no announcement, no explanation. The shift happened the way fog moves slowly, then everywhere. I noticed it in my father's eyes when he looked at the two of us. Those eyes were different depending on which one of us they landed on. I knew this by the time I was 5. Children always know. Adults think they're hiding it. They aren't. I still remember the afternoon clearly. I was 6. I had drawn a horse standing in a yellow field. I'd used 2 different yellow pencils to shade the grass because I wanted it to look real. My teacher had pressed a gold star into the top right corner. I carried the drawing home in both hands, ran into the kitchen, heart hammering with the particular excitement of a child who has made something and can't wait to show it. Dad, look! He glanced at it. Maybe 2 seconds. Nice job, sweetheart. Then back to Jason, who was sitting beside him. You hungry, bud? Want Dad to make something? I stood there, holding the drawing, waiting. Nothing else came. I didn't cry. I didn't fully understand why I wanted to. I just felt something begin to close inside my chest slowly. Like a door nobody wanted to shut, but nobody was willing to hold open either. I folded the drawing, put it in my backpack. The next morning, I made another one. Because when you're small, you think that if you just try one more time, this time will be different. You don't yet understand that sometimes the problem isn't the drawing. The problem is that the person looking doesn't know how to look. The living room wall told the story better than words ever could. Jason's baseball trophies lined the shelves. Jason's photographs filled every frame. Jason's certificates hung in the best spots, where every visitor would see them first. I had straight A's, a school-wide reading award, a certificate from the county spelling competition. Not one piece of paper on that wall. Not one photograph, as if my accomplishments had happened in a different house, to a different family, in a different life altogether. For a long time, I thought I wasn't trying hard enough. That's what children do. That's almost always the first conclusion a child reaches when love is withheld. They blame themselves. They work harder. They make themselves smaller. They tie themselves in knots trying to fit a shape that was never designed for them. And I did all of that. For years. With everything I had. The only person who saw me was my mother. Gloria Reeves had the quietest kind of intelligence, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that notices everything and says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. One evening when I was 11, I came home from a school awards assembly with a certificate in my hand and a weight in my chest. My father had asked 3 times during the ceremony whether Jason's team was going to the regional finals. I had sat with that certificate in my lap the entire drive home and said nothing. My mother came into my room around 9 o'clock. She knocked softly, sat on the edge of the bed, didn't say a word for a while. Then she said, "You're hurting." I know. Not a question. A fact. I couldn't hold it together after that. I told her what I'd been telling no one for years, that no matter what I did, I disappeared the moment Jason entered the room. She was quiet for a long time. Then she took my hand, looked straight at me, and said something I have carried in my chest every day since. "The people who underestimate you are not your ceiling, Diana. They are your floor. And one day, you are going to push off of them and fly." I didn't fully understand it at 11, but I felt it, and I never forgot it. The years kept moving the way they do, slowly while you're inside them, fast when you look back. Money in our house had a direction. Dad invested in Jason's baseball dreams, travel teams, private coaching, equipment, tournaments in other states. When I needed things, the answer was usually the same: we don't have it right now. By 14, I was babysitting on weekends. By 15, I had a part-time job at a grocery store. By 16, I was buying most of my own school supplies. I didn't complain about it out loud. I just learned something that took me years to fully appreciate. When nobody hands you anything, you become someone who doesn't need anyone to hand them anything. That's not a small thing. That is a foundation. Poured in quiet, set without ceremony, strong enough to build a life on. Then life delivered the hardest blow of all. My mother started getting sick during my junior year of high school. Slowly at first, unusual fatigue, appointments that grew more frequent, test results that nobody read out loud at the dinner table. I drove her to the pharmacy after school. I sat beside hospital beds doing homework. I held her hand through procedures I didn't have names for at 17. And I watched the strongest person I had ever known grow quieter, thinner, more deliberate with her energy, as if she was saving it for what mattered most. One evening, she reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker than I was used to. But her eyes were steady, certain in that way that isn't peace but is something adjacent to it. She said, "Promise me something." I said, "Anything." She said, "Never let someone else decide who you are." I promised. She smiled. The same smile that had carried me through every invisible moment, every silent dinner, every night. I went to bed, wondering what was wrong with me. Then she whispered the words I would hear in my head for the rest of my life. "One day they will all see you." I already know it. I thought she meant my father. I didn't understand yet that she was talking about something much bigger. And neither of us knew how little time we had left. My mother passed away 4 months before my high school graduation. The morning of the funeral, the house filled with people who meant well and said the right things. Neighbors, relatives, church friends, soft voices, careful condolences, casseroles left on the counter. And all I could think was that the one person in the world who had always noticed me was gone. For the first time in my life, I understood what it truly meant to be alone. Not because there was no one around, because the person who mattered most was missing. A week after the funeral, I found a letter tucked inside a small wooden box she had kept on her dresser. The envelope was worn at the edges, as if she had picked it up and set it down many times before deciding to leave it there. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Her perfume was still faint on the paper. I read the whole letter slowly, then read it again. And there was one line, one sentence that I had to read 5 times before I let myself believe she had actually written it down. "The people who underestimate you are not your ceiling. They are your floor. Stand up and walk." The exact words she had said to me that night when I was 11. She had written them down, so I would still have them when she wasn't there to say them. I folded the letter carefully, put it in my jacket pocket, and I kept it there, not for a few weeks, not for a year. I carried that letter with me for the next 20 years. In every bag I packed, to every place I went. Graduation came that spring. I walked across the stage and accepted my diploma and searched the crowd out of habit, and for 1/2 second I forgot. I looked for her. Just for a moment. Then reality came back. The empty seat beside my father felt larger than the entire auditorium. I accepted my diploma. I smiled for the camera. I fought back tears all the way to my seat. Outside afterward, most of the conversation was about Jason's upcoming tryout. College was a war I fought completely alone. My father had been clear about where the family's resources were going. I sat at the kitchen table one evening, filling out scholarship applications, Stacks of them, covering every inch of the surface. My father walked past, glanced at the pile. "What's all that?" I told him. He nodded. "That's probably your only shot. Not cruel, not encouraging. Just a statement of fact delivered the way you'd read a weather report." I almost quit that night. Almost. Then I remembered the letter, and I kept writing. The acceptance letters started arriving weeks later. One scholarship, then another, then 3 more. By the end of the process, I had enough financial aid to attend a university in San Antonio. Not because anyone gave me a chance, because I chased every single one down myself, with my own hands, in the margins of time everyone else used for sleeping. 4 years of college, 3 jobs running simultaneously. Early morning cafe shifts, afternoon tutoring sessions, weekend warehouse work, 6 hours of sleep on a good night. I graduated with honors. No one drove up to celebrate with me. I bought myself an ice cream cone, sat on a bench outside the building, looked up at the sky, and said out loud to no one, "Mom, I made it." Shortly after graduation, I walked into a United States Air Force recruitment office in downtown San Antonio. The recruiter asked me a question that no one had ever asked me seriously before. "What are you trying to accomplish?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "I want to earn something that no one can hand me and no one can take back." He nodded slowly. "That's one of the better answers I've heard." A few months later, I raised my right hand and took the oath. My father didn't come. He was following Jason's latest business venture. He called me that evening, said, "Be careful," hung up. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the small Air Force coin in my palm and told myself quietly, "Okay, just me then." And I was fine with that. More than fine. I had been training for exactly that my entire life. The military doesn't care where you come from. It doesn't care whose daughter you are, what your family believed about you, who invested in you and who didn't. It cares about one thing: what you do when you show up. And for the first time in my life, the rules were clean. Work hard, learn fast, earn respect. Nobody asked whether I was someone's sister. Nobody compared me to Jason. Results spoke for themselves. I loved that more than I can put into words. The promotions came, the commendations came, and something else came too. Something quieter and more valuable than either. People began requesting me specifically. Commanders wanted me in their circles. Programs I designed were adopted across bases. I mentored junior officers and watched them rise. And somewhere in those years, the question I'd spent my whole childhood trying to answer, does he see me? Does he care? Am I enough? That question just got quieter. Not answered? Exactly. Just quieter. Like an old wound that still pulls a little in cold weather but no longer stops you from walking. One deployment changed something in me permanently. I can't go into specifics. What I can tell you is this. For weeks, our team worked without real sleep because thousands of families needed to get home. Nobody ordered us to give everything we had. We just did. I watched service members carry elderly people through wreckage, comfort terrified children, solve problems that looked unsolvable at 2 in the morning. I remembered why I had signed up. At its best, leadership isn't about authority. It's about showing up for people who need someone to show up. I never thought of that deployment as anything remarkable. But someone was paying attention. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Official, Washington D.C. return address. I almost left it on the counter, assumed it was routine paperwork, something administrative. Instead, I made coffee, sat down, and opened it. I read it once, read it twice, read it a third time because the words kept arranging themselves into a meaning I couldn't fully accept. I had been selected for a national recognition honoring distinguished military leadership and public service. The ceremony would be held at the White House, not as part of a group, not as a representative. By name. My name. I sat there for a long time. Then I looked at the photograph of my mother on the bookshelf, the one from the front porch, coffee cup in hand, soft morning light, looking directly at the camera like she knew something the rest of the world hadn't caught up to yet. I said out loud to an empty room, "Mom, they finally saw me." Then I called my father. I gave him the facts plainly, without drama. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then his voice changed in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years, genuine, almost startled. "The White House?" "Yes." Another pause. "Well, that's really something, Diana." And then I knew it was coming. "Do family members attend these things?" There it was. The man who had barely acknowledged my promotion suddenly wanted every detail about the event. I noticed. I let it go. I said yes. And I meant it not to give him a front row seat to my victory. Because some part of me, the part that never completely grew past that kitchen in Beaumont, still wanted to give him one more chance to see what had been there all along. The week before the trip, I drove back to Beaumont. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how that happens, places shrink. When the memories you built inside them grow larger. My father was waiting on the porch, older now. Hair mostly gray, movements more careful. For the first time I noticed the signs of age that had once seemed impossible on him. I felt something unexpected. Tenderness. Not admiration. Not resentment. Just the quiet tenderness you feel towards someone who has always been exactly who they were. No more and no less. That night, in my old bedroom, I found the copy of my mother's letter I had left there years before. I read it again. The paper had gone a little yellow at the edges. The words hadn't. I looked around that room, the walls that had held so many nights. I cried without making a sound. So many mornings I woke before everyone else and reminded myself to keep going. The girl who used to curl up in this room and wonder what was wrong with her would never have believed where she was about to stand. Washington received us in winter clean cold. My father got off the plane like a man arriving at his own achievement. He pointed at the monuments. He struck up conversations with strangers in the hotel lobby, explaining the ceremony to anyone who would listen. A few people congratulated him. He accepted without correcting them. I noticed. I said nothing. Because I had known this pattern my entire life, and I had finally stopped needing it to change. The morning of the ceremony, I was awake before sunrise. Decades in uniform had made that automatic. I stood at the hotel window and watched Washington come to life beneath me. Early buses, workers beginning their day, a woman walking a dog along the mall in the gray pre-dawn light. I didn't feel nervous. Didn't feel the need to perform anything. Just a deep, settled calm. Like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Whatever happened next, I had already won. Not because of an award. Because I had become the person my mother believed I could be. Back when I was 6 years old, standing in a kitchen with a drawing no one looked at twice. That was the real victory. Everything else was just the ceremony. Our car pulled up to the White House grounds. My father adjusted his tie, checked his invitation, slipped it back in his pocket, took it out again. When the car stopped, his eyes went wide with a kind of wonder I hadn't seen in him in years. I couldn't help smiling at that. Whatever else was complicated between us, this moment was real for him. And I wasn't going to take that away. We joined the line of guests moving through security officers, officials, decorated veterans, their families. The atmosphere carried that particular mixture of dignity and anticipation that happens when people who have worked hard gather in a room where that work is being recognized. My father absorbed every second of it. By the time we reached the registration desk, he already had his invitation out, holding it at a slight angle where the gold lettering caught the light. He glanced at me. That smile, familiar as the kitchen table in Beaumont, as the living room wall covered in Jason's trophies and missing mine, as every "that's nice" sweetheart delivered to a carpet while his attention was already somewhere else. That small, certain, comfortable smile. And he said it lightly, conversationally, as though it were simply true. You weren't invited. For one fraction of 1 second she came back. The 6-year-old holding the drawing. The 11-year-old sitting alone on the edge of her bed. The girl who stood beside her father at a dozen events and understood she was scenery, not subject. She appeared. Right there, in the lobby of the White House, for the smallest sliver of a moment. Then she was gone. Because I was not that girl anymore. I didn't argue. Didn't explain. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out my invitation, and placed it on the registration desk. The attendant smiled and scanned it. The device made its small sound, then stopped. She looked at the screen. Looked at me. Looked at the screen again. Something shifted in her posture, the subtle, unmistakable shift of someone who has just recognized a name they were told to watch for. She turned toward the room. Found the general, said, in a voice that carried farther than she probably intended. Sir, she's here. Across the lobby, a 2-star general looked up from his conversation. He started walking toward us. Not a casual walk. A deliberate one. The kind that makes a room recalibrate without knowing why. 3 officers near the far wall straightened without any order being given. A cluster of guests near the beverage table went quiet. The ceremonial music still floated in from the hall, but the air around us went still the way air goes, still just before something important happens. My father turned to see where the general was heading. I watched his face move through 4 expressions in about 3 seconds. Confusion, search, deeper confusion, then something that looked almost like vertigo. His hand, the one holding the gold-embossed VIP invitation, dropped slightly to his side. The general stopped directly in front of me. His face was warm and completely unhurried. He said, "Lieutenant Colonel Reeves," said my name, "and rank the way you say something you've been looking forward to saying. It is genuinely an honor to meet you in person." I shook his hand. "The honor is mine, General." He gestured toward the entrance. "Your place is at the front. Whenever you're ready." Then he looked at my father, briefly, courteously. "You must be Diana's father." My father nodded, still hadn't found words. "You should be very proud, sir." My father opened his mouth, closed it. Nothing came out. I didn't look at him with triumph. I didn't look at him at all. Not then. I thanked the general and moved forward. Because this moment was not about proving anything to my father. This moment belonged to the girl who bought her own textbooks, who studied in parking lots between shifts, who carried a handwritten letter from her dead mother in every bag she packed for 20 years. She had earned this room. I was simply walking into it. Inside, I was escorted to the front section. Not guest seating, not family seating, the honorees section, right at the front. My father found his seat several rows behind me. From where he sat, he could see the entire hall responding to his daughter officer after officer crossing the floor to greet me. Brief conversations built on years of shared work, a recognition I hadn't performed for and hadn't advertised. Just the natural result of showing up, again and again, in rooms where nobody was watching. When my name was announced, the applause was real. Not polite. Real. I sat there for one long moment before I stood. Not from surprise. From being overwhelmed in a way I hadn't prepared for. Because that applause wasn't for one assignment. Or one day. It represented every late night. Every self-funded year. Every morning I woke up in a hotel room in some city far from anyone who knew me and reminded myself why I was still going. Every time I read my mother's letter by the light of a phone screen because I needed to hear her voice, and that was the closest I could get. As I walked to the front of the room, I looked out into the audience. I found my father. He wasn't applauding politely. He wasn't performing. He was sitting very still, and his eyes were red. I had never seen that before. Not aimed at me. Not like that. The citation was read aloud. Leadership, service, mentorship, humanitarian impact, community engagement. Each accomplishment sounded slightly surreal, as if it belonged to someone else until I remembered it didn't. It belonged to the girl from Beaumont who paid for her own school supplies, who graduated on 3 jobs and 6 hours of sleep, who poured everything she had into work that no one at her kitchen table ever asked about. When it was over, and I returned to my seat, the general leaned over and said quietly, "Your mother would be proud of you." Those words hit harder than anything else that happened that day. Harder than the recognition. Harder than the applause. Harder than the handshakes and the citations and the gold seal on the official program. Because he was right. And because in that moment, more than anything, more than every award in that room combined, I wish she could have been sitting beside my father. Watching. Knowing she had been right about me. Before anyone else chose to look. When the ceremony ended, and the hall shifted into the warm movement of people who've just shared something significant, my father made his way to me. Slowly. Like a man carrying more weight than usual, he stopped a few feet away. I waited. He said, "I didn't know, Diana." His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I didn't know any of it. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "I know, Dad." 2 words. And they held everything. We walked outside together. The afternoon had gone warm, the winter sun long and golden across the grounds. He asked if I wanted to walk. I said yes. We moved in silence for a while, 2 people with decades of unfinished things between them, finally in the same space with nowhere else to be. He stopped beside a bench, sat down heavily, looked at the ground. "I built everything around a wrong idea," he said. "I thought sons carried the family forward. I thought that was my job to invest in your brother." He rubbed his palms together slowly. "I thought daughters didn't need that." A long pause. "Your mother tried to tell me so many times. I wasn't listening." A flag moved gently in the wind nearby. "I can't get those years back." He looked up at me, eyes still red. "But can we go forward?" Can we do that? I looked at him. I thought about my mother on her front porch, coffee in hand, looking straight at the camera like she already knew. I thought about a drawing of a horse in a yellow field that nobody looked at long enough. I thought about every scholarship application written by lamplight after midnight, every letter folded into every bag. Every morning I had to remind myself that her belief in me was real, even when no one else's was. And then I thought about what she would say, right now, if she were standing here. "Yeah, Dad," I said. "We can go forward." His shoulders dropped. For the first time all day, he looked like someone who could breathe. A few months after Washington, he called and asked if I'd meet him at the cemetery on Saturday. We brought white flowers, the same kind my mother used to plant along the front porch every April. The cemetery sat on a low hill outside Beaumont, quiet in the particular way of places where time moves differently. We stood at her grave without speaking for a long time. Then my father reached into his jacket pocket and took out something folded carefully. I recognized it immediately. The official White House ceremony program. The gold seal still sharp at the corner. He placed it gently beside the flowers. He looked down at the headstone. His voice wasn't steady. "You were right," he said. "You were right about her from the very beginning. I'm sorry I made you wait so long for me to see it." Those words hung in the morning air. Simple. True. Decades overdue and still necessary. I didn't fill the silence. I let the words go where they needed to go. What I've learned, what this whole story taught me, is that forgiveness isn't the same thing as pretending the past didn't happen. It's the decision to stop letting the past run the future. I didn't hand my father absolution. I handed him a door. Whether he walked through, it was always going to be his choice. The fact that he did slowly, imperfectly, with years of regret behind him, that is human, that is real. That is what healing actually looks like when you stop expecting it to arrive perfectly. The mistake most people make is waiting for the apology to come in exactly the right form, with exactly the right words, at exactly the right time. That almost never happens. What usually happens is a man placing a ceremony program on a grave, a few sentences that can't fix anything but mean everything, and a daughter who decides not for him, but for herself, that enough is enough. If you have ever been the person in the room who worked harder than anyone watching, who achieved things in the quiet where no one was applauding, I need you to hear this. Your worth did not begin the moment someone finally acknowledged it. It was already there. It has always been there. My mother knew it when I was 6 years old, holding a drawing of a horse that nobody looked at twice. My father needed a 2-star general to walk across a White House lobby before he understood. The difference was never about me. It was about what they chose to see. Here's the question I'd leave you sitting with today. Is there someone in your life you've been looking past? Not out of cruelty, just out of habit, just because your attention was pointed somewhere else. Because the cost of that habit doesn't show up all at once. It shows up in the small moments. A child standing in a kitchen, a drawing in both hands, waiting. Drop a comment below. Type 1 if Diana's story hit something real for you. Type 2 if my father's breakdown surprised you. Type 3 if you've had your own moment, the moment someone finally saw you, even if it came late. I read every single one. And tell me where in the world you're watching from right now, because this community reaches places I never expected, and that still moves me every time I see it. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this only travel as far as the people willing to carry them. And if you want more stories about the quiet kinds of courage, the ones that don't make headlines but change everything, we would love to have you here. Subscribe, because we are just getting started. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined, set in Houston, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.